suppose you had a pizza and you cut it into 4 equal slices. That would make each slice of the pizza 1/4 of a pizza. And suppose now that one of your friends came and ate one of those slices of pizza. How many pieces would you have left? You'd have 3, right? You'd have 3 pieces out of the 4 that you had before. And so that would make the fraction 3/4. Sort of means that you have 3/4 of a pizza left. And that also makes sense because we said earlier that each slice of the pizza would be 1/4. So if this is 1/4, that would be 2/4, and then 3/4 of a pizza. So let's take a look at the fraction 3/4. So every fraction has a numerator, a denominator, and a fraction bar in between. So the numerator is just everything above the fraction bar, the denominator is just everything below the fraction bar. And so here our numerator is 3, here our denominator is 4. And a few other ways to say this fraction, you can call it 3/4. You could also say that this is 3/4, just because a fourth is commonly known as a quarter. You could also say this is 3/4, or since the fraction bar actually denotes division, you could say 3 divided by 4. And so what would be 3 divided by 4? If you go and punch that in your calculator, it's going to give you 0.75. And that makes sense because 3/4 would be 75 cents, right? And to write 75 cents, it's going to look a little something like this. Alright, so this fraction here, 3/4, in terms of our pizza from before, this is telling us that we have 3/4 of a pizza, right? It's also telling us that if we had a pizza and it took 4 pieces to make the whole pizza, we have 3 of those pieces. And so if we have 3 of those pieces, what if we had 4 of those pieces? So we've got another piece of pizza here. So that's 4/4 now, right? So let's go ahead and change this fraction. 4/4. So how much is 4/4 of a pizza? Remember we said that this fraction bar is kind of like denoting division. 4 divided by 4 is just 1, right? So if you have 4/4 of pizza, you have 1 pizza, and of course, right? I drew it. There's 1 pizza here. So what if you had 8/4 of a pizza? So let me just go and draw 4 more fourths, right? Because we already had 4, so I'm going to draw 4 more. Okay, got your pepperoni, maybe some olives, Some people like some jalapenos on there. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8/4. So how many pizzas is that? Well, you could probably tell from the picture, right? But what if I just draw it over here? 8/4. Do that one on your calculator. 8 divided by 4 is 2, right? So 8/4 of a pizza is actually 2 pizzas. And you can see that right here. Something important to note is that with any fraction, there's a bunch of ways to write equivalent fractions to that fraction. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you had 3/4 of a pizza like before, so that's 3/4, right? 3/4 is actually equal to 6/8. And let me show you that with the pizza. So this is 3/4. If I were to slice this pizza, let's try that again. 2 more times. Now we have a pizza where we have 8 equal slices. There's these ones we're missing, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Except we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them left, right? Remember one of our friends stole a piece from us? So, turns out if you have an 8-piece pizza and you take away 2 pieces from it, you have 6/8 of a pizza. But as you can see from the drawing, 6/8 of a pizza is the same as 3/4 of the pizza, right? We have just as much pizza as we had before. We just cut it a few more times. And so that means that 3/4 is going to be equal to 6/8. And 6/8 is going to be equal to 12/16. And I can show that to you also on here. I'll make one here, go ahead and make one there. So I don't know who would cut up a pizza into 16 pieces, but if you did, you could take away 4 pieces and you'd be left with 12/16. And so we're going to talk in the next section about how to figure out what fractions are equal to each other and why they're equal to each other. But just so you to make sure, just so you believe me, go ahead and try doing 3 divided by 4 on your calculator. Try doing 6 divided by 8 on your calculator. And try 12 divided by 16. You're always going to get 0.75. And that's just because there's always the same ratio between this numerator and this denominator for all 3 of these fractions. And just like with the pizza, it's the same amount of pizza, it's just cut more times. Alright, so in our last example, we saw that 3/4, 6/8, and 12/16 are all equal to each other. But of these 3, only 3/4 is in lowest terms. Or in other words, 3/4 is the one that's completely simplified. And that's the case because 3 and 4 have no common factors between them. However, over here with 6/8, if we wanted to simplify that, we'd take 6/8, and then we'd see what common factors they had. So looking at these, they're both even, so I know they both have a 2 in common. So I could rewrite this as 2 times 3 over 2 times 4. And then 2 divided by 2 is just 1, so these sort of cancel out, and you're just left with 3 over 4. So, this is sort of also showing that 6/8 is equal to 3 over 4, but this is also just simplifying that fraction into lowest terms. So if I wanted to do the same thing for 12/16, I could write that right here. And then so I know these both have a 2 in common. I know they probably both have maybe some other numbers in common. So let's just take 2's out and see what happens. So this is 2 times 6, right? And then 16 is 2 times 8. And I know 6 is 2 times 3, so let's do that. And I know 8 is 2 times 4. And now we have this 2 over 2 right here, that'll cancel out. And we have this 2 over 2 right here, that'll cancel out, and we're just left with 3/4 again. So that's the basic way to get your fractions in the lowest terms. So in general, when you're simplifying fractions, you could just keep dividing out numbers from the top and the bottom, but in general, you just want to factor out the greatest common factor between the numerator and the denominator. So over here, I took out a 2 and a 2 from the top and the bottom, but I could have just taken out a 4 from both of them. So for example, and I'll write it up here, I know that a 4 goes into 12 and a 4 goes into 16, so I could sort of think about it as dividing this by 4 and dividing this by 4, and that's going to give me 12 over 4 is 3, right? And 16 over 4 is 4. So that's another way to think about it. So if we wanted to simplify a fraction like 36 over 24, we could start by getting the prime factorization of the numerator and the denominator. So to do that, we'll write 36 right here and 24 over here. And so to get the prime factorization, you could just take the smallest number that you can think of out of the number, like 2 for example. This is even, so I know I can take a 2 out. And then so 2 times what equals 36? Well, that's going to be 2 times 18, right? And then you just keep doing the same thing as many times as you can. So 2, that's already, nothing goes into that besides 2 and 1. Over here though, 18, you can take a 2 out of that as well, and that'll be 2 times 9, right? And then over here, you can take a 3 out of 9, which would be 3 times 3. And, you can't factor these 3's anymore, so you're done. And then over here with the 24, you can take a 2 out of that, that's even as well, right? That would be 2 times 12. And then with 12, you can take a 2 out of that, that'd be 2 times 6. 6 would be 2 times 3. And then you could just go ahead and circle all the ones that are at the bottom of their chain. And that's the prime factorization of that number. So basically once you're done with this, we can rewrite 36 as 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. So I'll do that right here. 2 times 2 times 2, 2 times 2 times 3 times 3, right? And then the 24 I can rewrite as 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. Okay, and then so just like before, we can just cancel out anything that's the same in the numerator and the denominator, since those would equal 1. And then there's 3 over 3 right here. And we're left with this 3 over this 2. And it turns out 36 over 24 is equal to 3 over 2. And another way to think about this is, like if you don't want to go through all this trouble, you could just think about, what's the biggest number that I could take out of both of these. And you might have saw off the bat that, you could take a 12 out of both of these. So 36 divided by 12 is going to be 3, right? And 24 divided by 12 is going to be a 2. And the reason we're allowed to do this is because this is basically like multiplying the fraction by 1, because this is like taking 36 over 24 and multiplying it by 1 over 12 over 1 over 12. And this is 1 over 12 over 1 over 12 is equal to 1, so you're allowed to do that. And so that would have given you 3 over 2 as well. And if you're, sort of scared of this method because you don't want to get it wrong, you shouldn't worry, because even if you don't pick the greatest factor, for example, like if you would have just said, okay, I know 6 goes into 36 and it goes into 24, so I'll do this, right? I'll take a 6 out of both. Then I'm going to end up with 6 over 4. And so look, this isn't completely simplified yet, but that's not the end of the world, because all you have to do is take another 2 out of both of these, and you end up with 3 over 2. So, sometimes it's just easier to take out the first thing you notice that goes into both of these and then keep going until you're in like some simplest form. One thing I want to talk about really quick is when you have a 0 in a fraction. So you may already know if you had a 0 in like the numerator, for example, that would end up equaling 0, no matter what. 0 over anything except 0 over 0. And then if you had a 0 in the denominator, like this would actually be undefined. And so I just want to talk about why really quick, and hopefully my explanation will help you memorize this better. So the way I like to think about it is if you had a different fraction, like let's say 4 over 2. 4 over 2 is equal to what? It's equal to 2, right? But what this fraction is telling us is, and in division in general, it's saying what do we have to multiply this number by to get to this number? That's sort of the idea of division, like what do you have to multiply the second number by to get back to the first number? And so 2, to get to 4, you'd have to multiply by 2, right? That's why the answer is 2. So if we had a fraction like this, where we had 0 over 2, what could I multiply 2 by to get to 0? Well, 2 times 0 equals 0, right? So that would be our answer. But once you have the 0 on the bottom of the fraction, like this, what could I multiply 0 by to get to 2? If I multiply 0 by 2, I just get 0. If I multiply 0 by a million, I still get 0. No matter what, you're always going to get 0 when you multiply 0 by something, and you'll never get to 2. It's impossible. That's why this is undefined.